I'm Larry Fedoruk. Welcome to my podcast. This is I Was 8, a personal journal storytelling podcast about growing up on the Great Canadian Prairie. Some of the timelines bend a little, but all of these stories are true.
I Was 8, The Lost Episodes. Number 11, The Roommate.
When I was 8, I got a roommate. My grandfather, my mom's dad, my dzido, as we called him in Ukrainian. His wife, my grandma, was my baba. She had passed a few years earlier. I was close to them both, because when I was 4 and 5, Mom taught at a country school just a mile down the road from the old homestead, where she was born and raised. Her mom and dad often babysat me. I spent a lot of time following my dzido around the farm. My uncle had taken over all the heavy machinery part of farming. My grandfather did most of everything else: cows, pigs, chickens, yard work, the garden, and I was his apprentice. Well, not sure how much help I was at age 5, but I put in a full day. My grandfather Jacob came to Canada as a young boy himself. Eventually went out on his own, got his own farm and family going. A very knowledgeable man, and I took full advantage, constantly calling upon his expertise in various areas. Hey, Grandpa, when you slop the hogs, is there a specific slop recipe, or can you change it up? And if you do change it, do the hogs know the difference? Hey, how come we have a chicken coop, but the neighbor's farm has a hen house? Why don't cows drink milk? Have you ever met Massey Ferguson? Do his friends call him Mr. Ferguson or just Massey? Why is it called rhubarb? Why isn't it just called sour celery? How many ants live in an anthill? Could you use a head of cabbage as a bowling ball? Where does the sun go at night? Can I play with your jackknife? Why is it called a jackknife? Was the guy who invented it named Jack? Can you use a jackknife to cut a jackfish? What is dirt made from? Is flour made from flowers? Why are you talking to chickens? Can I get suspenders? How come? He always had answers. Actually taught me a lot about the farm. The animals, the garden, how to plant, how to know when something's ready to pull up and eat. I learned how to dig potatoes, wash them up and get them ready for supper. Sometimes, even though they had a car, Grandpa would hook the horse up to the buggy and we'd go for a ride around the countryside. Good times. Hey, Grandpa, I'm hungry. No problem. I brought a couple of turnips. After a morning of chores, obviously, some days I was one of them, Grandpa always came in for a hot lunch. And Grandma also made a big pot of hot tea. It could be July and 100 degrees out, but a hot lunch and a hot cup of tea. I was allowed to have tea. They snuck some milk into it, but hot tea with Grandpa in the midday sun. 2 men sitting there sweating it out. He would always tell me that a hot beverage on a hot day is the best thirst quencher. I guess he was right, because I didn't seem thirsty for hours afterward. Speaking of which, around mid-afternoon, we'd come back in for a break. He would pour 2 cups of still warm tea from that noon pot. It was pretty strong. Milk would barely change the color. Then he buttered a slice of bread each and sent me to the garden to pull up some green onions. That was our snack. To this day, I have that at least once every summer. Tea, buttered bread, and green onion. A taste combo that means a lot to me, probably no one else, unless Lay's comes up with tea, onion, and butter-flavored potato chips. Until they do, I'll know that me and Gramps were the only ones that enjoyed that particular flavor fusion. My grandfather once got some cement and, with rocks that he picked up around the farm, fashioned a large outdoor stone oven. He'd keep a fire going in there until all the rocks got super hot. Then he'd clean out the embers and the ashes, and Grandma would bake bread in there outdoors, which later she would slice off still warm and give me a piece with homemade strawberry jam. That sounds like 200 years ago, but it wasn't. It was my lifetime, part of my childhood. Cool, huh? Sometimes when life becomes just too 21st century to even bear, I'll remember that. Oh yeah, I did that when I was a kid. By the time I was 8, we had already lived in town for a few years. Waukau, Saskatchewan, 1,000 people. I was a city slicker now, completely sophisticated. My grandma had died a while ago, and it was surreal. I don't remember mourning or being sad. I mean, I was sad that Mom was sad, but I wasn't sad for Grams or myself. Here's why I think. Number one, I was a kid. Also, I didn't see that much of her anymore. And when I did, she never felt too well. Could barely get around the house. She spent a lot of time looking for her glasses, which she needed to help Grandpa because he couldn't find his teeth. You know, you often leave your glasses inside the cupboard when you're making supper, and I think the glass with Grandpa's teeth got moved behind the flour tin. Oh, yes, thank you, Larry. Hey, no problem. Glad I could help. And the Catholics really sold that she's in a better place thing. So I thought, well, she moved to a better place. Bonus for Grams. Good for her. What's to be sad about? Well, you know, maybe I wasn't as sophisticated as I thought. After she died, Grandfather seemed to get much older much quicker. Even the chores he still did around the farm were beginning to be a struggle. Of course, I wasn't there to help. It was decided he would move into town and live with us. 2-story, 2-bedroom house. He's not bunking in with Mom and Dad. Larry, you're getting a roommate. I was excited. Of course, now the tables had turned. He was on my territory now. It would be my job to explain to him the ways of city slickerness. I had to show him the ropes. I would answer his questions. All right, this is where we keep the Rice Krispies. All cereal box prizes belong to me, regardless of who finds them. This is my hockey set. If we play, I always get to be the Leafs. When I'm at school, you can play with my car collection or my box of rocks. Just make sure you put them back afterwards. Don't leave them around the living room. After school, I have to rake some leaves. You can come along and help if you want. At 4:30, we watch Huckleberry Hound. He seemed amenable. I was probably the only 8-year-old in town whose bedroom included an ashtray. Grandpa still smoked. Roll your owns. Never bought a big full tin of tobacco. Just one blue player's pack at a time, the zigzag papers. He'd roll himself a fat one and seemed to smoke the same one all day, right down to nothing. He taught me how to roll them. Me and my friends didn't smoke. Most of the kids in town didn't pick that up until 11 or 12. But I knew how to roll them, skills that would serve me well in college. The same little rickety single cot I slept in at my grandparents' house was now wedged into a corner of my room as Grandpa's bed. A little night table for his teeth and his ashtray. Many is the night I'd fall asleep to the sweet smell of fine Virginia tobacco smoke still in the air. Just before Gramps had moved in, I had a new rule for nighttime. I was no longer required to kneel beside my bed and say my prayers out loud. Mom said I could get into bed and say my prayers silently to myself before I fell asleep. This was a bonus for me, because only I knew what I was really thinking. They thought I was praying, but really I was thinking about funny jokes from my riddle book. Of course, I guess God also knew that I was not praying. But I figured, what the hell? He could probably use a good laugh at the end of a hard day. Sometimes I'd forget and laugh out loud. What gives milk but only has one horn? A milk truck? Nah. What are you doing, Larry? Nothing. I mean, praying. You know, that Holy Ghost. Boy, he always makes me chuckle. Grandpa didn't care for the nocturnal silent prayer. So we had to kneel down and pray out loud together before bed. Always had to say a few separate prayers and say who they were for. Usually a variety of dead people, Grandma always at the top of the list. The Lord up there as some celestial DJ taking requests and dedications. Why are we praying for the dead? They're in heaven or hell. That's not changing. That's written in stone no matter how much we pray. Right? Oh well, you're the grandpa. Then he'd sit on his bed, have his smoke. I'd get under my covers, think of some jokes. We'd drift off, and I even learned how to sleep through the snoring and the coughing. All in all, it was working out pretty good. Oh, a few things were tougher to do now that I wasn't home alone after school. Larry, are you supposed to have 3 Pepsis before supper? Yeah, Dad said I could, but only on Tuesdays. Larry, are you eating pudding powder right out of the Jell-O box? No. Yes, I'm allowed. Gramps would usually tell Mom I didn't care for that. Hey, I thought we were roommates. And then he knew that I was lying earlier, so we'd have to cover that off in the evening prayers. He kept me in line. Mind you, he obeyed my rules, too. For example, never once did I come home to find all of my toy cars all over the living room. I assume we always put them back. It was my new normal. As I imagined it, this must be what it's like to have an older brother. Except he couldn't play sports with you because of the 70-year age difference. One day I came home after school and the house was empty. No note, no nothing. I wonder what's going on. Well, none of my beeswax. This was like old times. Home alone. Where's the pudding powder and Pepsi? It was about a half an hour later than Mom usually got home when I finally heard the car pull up. It was Mom and Dad. Why wasn't Dad at work? They came in and told me Grandpa was gone. I'm not sure who found him at home, but he was just barely alive when they got him to the hospital, and he didn't make it. He went to that better place. Though I felt much older than when Grandma died, this time I also felt more confused. I just got used to all this, and now it's over? Hey, I was still learning empathy. Never said I was any good at it. That night, I knelt by my bed and said my prayers out loud, threw in a special one for him. I don't remember much about the funeral, except lots of people. My uncles, who lived far away in Alberta and BC, were in town, and they all told stories about their dad. Some of them were about being little kids on the farm and following him around as he did the chores. His cot stayed up in my room for a while after, along with his night table, a pack of Players' tobacco, the zigzags, and the ashtray. I rolled a couple of cigarettes and left them in there. One day I came home and they were gone. Oh my God, Grandpa's ghost smoked my smokes. Turns out Mom had just emptied the ashtray. And eventually the cot and the night table were gone too. People say I look like my dad, and I really do, I can see that. But there is a picture of my mom's folks, my Guido and Baba, as a young married couple in their mid-20s. You know, those old sepia shots, stoic, with that look on their faces like they're possibly suspicious of the camera device. And the more I looked at that, the more I would see me. That is, of course, how genetics work. It's not that odd to look a little like both sides of your family, but I only realized that much, much later in life. How much we looked alike. Me and my roommate.
Thanks for listening to I Was 8, a weekly podcast voiced, written, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. This podcast is available on most major platforms, or check out the I Was 8 YouTube channel. Larry Fedoruk, that's Fedoruk, can be reached at larryfedoruk37@gmail.com.